Hello everyone, Bob Believers around the world, and in today's video we are going to be exposing something huge that completely destroys a really big and popular false doctrine, alright? So on the channel, we've covered a lot of false doctrine about the Neanderthals in the past. You know, people saying that the Neanderthals are the Nephilim from Enoch, and white people have demon blood and they can't be saved, and cave beasts, and all this type of horrible stuff. And in a previous lesson, we proved that the Neanderthals were actually ancient humans and that they do not match any of the biblical descriptions of the Nephilim, and they didn't possess any Nephilim mutation traits, okay? So we already discovered that. But what I want to talk about today is people who you see online who are pushing like the Elijah Muhammad Nation of Islam Pan-African, doctrine about the sons and daughters of Japheth not being human and being Neanderthal monkeys. They attribute Neanderthal DNA to being some type of monkey, and that, Japheth is not human and all that type of stuff. And there's a few things to say to that. For starters, you hear these people say that they are not human. They being, us Israelites, they'll say, we're not human, we're Anunnaki. The white man, Japheth, he's a human, he's a monkey, we're Anunnaki. This goes to show how unlearned these people are. Or as in the source, Sons and Daughters of the Covenant of Yah read recently, unlettered blacks. All right? That's what these people are. Because in the scripture, Anunnaki is a type of Nephilim. So when you're going around saying, brothers and sisters, we got to stop saying this. For one thing, it's not scripture-based. It comes from the false doctrines of the Nation of Islam. But when you're going around proclaiming that you're Anunnaki and that you're from the stars, you're saying that you're a demon. You're saying that you're not human. It's not, it's nothing to be proud of. Like, we're not Anunnaki. We are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're human. Just like the Japhites, the Caucasians, they're human. Just like the Asians are human. Just like the Hamites, the Africans are human. So we need to stop this Anunnaki stuff because that's a false teaching. And we're not Anunnaki. Anunnaki is a type of Nephilim, aka demon. All right. You see so many people talking about, the people in these comment sections being like, we're Anunnaki. We're from the stars. White man, he's a human. He's a monkey. All right. So had to get that out of the way. Now, for the elephant in the room, every so-called race of humans has Neanderthal DNA, including the so-called African American. So when you're going around saying that the sons and daughters of Japheth are beasts, have beast DNA, and they can't be saved, you are really digging a hole for yourself, because by you teaching that that Japhites are beasts and, and they can't be saved in Neanderthal DNA, you're really preaching your own demise as well, because we have Neanderthal DNA as well, if we want to accept it or not. So you can't have it both ways. You say that they're beasts and can't be saved because of Neanderthal DNA, but we have Neanderthal DNA as well. So I guess we're monkeys too, based on your doctrine. Let's go get into it. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to bring something up, all right? So in the introduction, I mentioned how this is a false doctrine from Pan-Africanism, all right? And I'm not a Pan-African, okay? Now, there's many Israelites who really toe the line between Pan-Africanism, but here's the truth on why I'm not a Pan-African and why it's not even biblical to be one, okay? For starters, we Israelites are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the land that was promised to Abraham's descendants forever by the Most High Yahuwah was not Africa. It was not the land of Ham. Africa is Ham's land. So us as Israelites, there's some of us who are so obsessed and tied to this landmass that is not ours. Okay? That's not the land that was promised to us. And some have even gone as far to try and twist history to make it so that Jerusalem, our homeland, the land of Israel, was in Africa. That makes no sense when you realize that when the Israelites were in Egypt, they had to cross the Red Sea to get to the other side. So if we were already living in Africa, why do we have to cross the Red Sea? So now you'd have to move Egypt into the Middle East to make that work. You see? It makes no sense. And another reason why Pan-Africanism, besides the obsession over a land that's not ours, is the fact that Scripture tells us that we were scattered into all nations, all right, the four corners of the earth. And there's so many Israelites who are talking about Africa this, Africa that, Israelites, Africa, that we have brothers and sisters, the Portuguese Jews, the Jews that were scattered into Spain, all right, the Afro-Mexicans, all right, the Jews, the Portuguese Jews, I think it was, who eventually got kicked out by the sons and daughters of Japheth, and I think they got sent to the island of St. Thomas. It was either called St. Thomas or St. Martin. We don't talk about none of these people. All right? Now, there are Israelites that were scattered into Africa, of course. All nations, four corners of the earth. But with Pan-Africanism, not only does it make us act like and think that we're Ham and accept Hamite customs and get engravings of Egyptian idols on our bodies and all this other type of stuff, but it makes us reject our brothers and sisters scattered amongst the world, other nations. I mean, with Pan-Africanism, you're never going to hear about Israelites being scattered into India. You're never going to hear about the Afro-Mexicans. You're never going to hear about the Portuguese and, Jews of Spain. You're never going to hear about them, all right? So Africa has never been the center of attention for everything. It's not our home, and we're not all in Africa, okay? And we don't even come from Africa, as a matter of fact. We come from Arabia, all right? So that's why I don't follow all that, okay? And also, there's a lot of hatred towards Gentiles with Pan-Africanism and trying to dehumanize the sons and daughters of Japheth. So a lot of these doctrines that the Japhites, commonly referred to now in modern terms as white people, can't be saved, comes from Pan-African individuals, okay? Now, let's get started. Yes, African-American individuals carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, typically around 0.3 of their genome. While historically thought to have zero, recent studies show their DNA originated from ancestral inbreeding and largely from Europeans migrating back to Africa over the past 20,000 years. All right, now, take this with a grain of salt, because as we've talked about in the past, there were other Neanderthals that lived in different places. Not all of them are the European Neanderthals, okay? And also, the Earth is not even 20,000 years old. So, let's keep going. Key details regarding Neanderthal DNA in African populations include studies have identified an average of roughly 17 megabase MB of Neanderthal DNA, which is about 0.3 of the genome. Origin. This DNA is not just from ancient prehistoric out of Africa events, but also from more recent migrations of Eurasian populations back into Africa. Significance. This suggests that Neanderthal DNA exists in all modern human populations studied to date, not just in African, European, or Asian populations. Function. Some of the identified Neanderthal genes in these populations are linked to immune function and protection against blah, 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 blah. It is important to note that the percentage of Neanderthal DNA in African populations is generally lower than found in people of Europe or Asian ancestry, which is typically 1% to 2%. Okay, so in other words, if you teach that the Neanderthals are the Nephilim, we're all doomed, okay? Now, we already exposed a million reasons why that's not the case, but this is very reminiscent of when the sons and daughters of Japheth would bully and mock the complexion of the Shemites and Hamites, saying that our dark skin is ugly and all that type of stuff, when, long behold, their ancestors were darker than me. Because we covered that recently. When you go back to the Tower of Babel time period, the sons and daughters of Japheth, commonly referred to as the Caucasian now, they were blacker than me. All right, so they're mocking something that they used to be. And it's the same thing with the Pan-African thing, where you're trying to dehumanize, nations of people for having a genetic something when you have that same genetic something.